Well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak at the Mill Road History Society. It's quite emotional for me, really, because I managed this building. I worked in this community for I don't know how many years, a lot. And it's like really is like coming home. So it's just wonderful to be here. And I do know a lot of your faces, and it's really nice. Right, down to business. A book about Cambridge University and prostitutes was always going to cause a bit of a stir. But really, this is more than just a saucy tale. It's really a story that's actually about town and gown relations, a battle for power. For centuries, the people of Cambridge were subjected not only to the law of the land, but also the laws, rights and privileges of the university. Laws created to protect and benefit the gown, not the town. Even elected councillors had to swear to uphold these laws and privileges. Among many things, the university vice-chancellors jealously guarded the rights, over the sale of wine and spirits, licensing of pubs and theatres, the amount of credit shopkeepers could extend to scholars. And those breaking the rules were dealt with very harshly by the vice-chancellor's court, but none as harshly as the young unchaperoned women walking in the streets of Cambridge after dark. For there, during term time, the proctor and his men, the bulldogs, patrol the streets and morals of the local women. The protection of the young gentleman was absolutely paramount. So how come the university had the right to arrest and imprison women? In 1561, Queen Elizabeth signed a charter allowing senior members of the university the right to arrest and imprison any woman suspected of evil. That 16th century charter, made into an Act of Parliament by Charles I, would haunt the lives of every woman in Cambridge for over 3 centuries and lead to riots on the streets of Cambridge. But why were the universities so keen to lock up women? Parents were absolutely terrified their precious sons, and they were titled men a lot in this period, that they might fall prey to seduction. So they demanded the vice-chancellor keep the streets clean, and that's the word they used, but very important to keep the streets clean. But mistakes were made. Innocent as well as the guilty were dragged inside the spinning house. Some went screaming and kicking, all forever tarnished by association with the spinning house. Their work prospects diminished. Some of the townspeople retaliated. The battle to free women spotted in the clutches of the proctor were legendary, and riot and unrest flooded the pavements. And I'm just going to go to my first slide. Yeah. So this is a book by Roland Parker, Town and Gown, the 700 Years' War. I think it's now 800 years. But it's just full of stories of riot between town and gown, and also between the students themselves, because actually in this period, you get students coming from the north and some from the south, and they would fight each other as well. Because some colleges tend to have northern students and some had southern students. So really, they were always out for a fight most of the time, really. And they carried knives in those days, standard practice, really. So it was all a bit grim, really. So in his book, Parker describes all the scuffles that broke out. And many of these scuffles actually started because the townspeople had seen women in the clutches, an innocent woman in the clutches of a proctor. And this really gave them an excuse to release pent-up grievances against this powerful master, the university. The town usually won the fist fights, but punishment came in the form of more and more privileges for the university. And stepping out of a line came at a huge cost for anybody, really, male or female. So for the past 5 years, I've been buried in the archives, piecing together the stories of some of the women dragged inside the spinning house. So how did I get from archive to book? From the outset, I had a story in my mind, one I will add to this particular group, given to me by Alan Brigham, and we debate it endlessly. This is the true story of Daisy Hopkins, who, legend had it, was responsible for an Act of Parliament in 1894, which saw the end of the spinning house, and the university was no longer allowed to arrest women suspected of evil. This story bugged me. It bugged me for ages, so I actually had the time to do something about it. It bugged me because I thought, how could a so-called prostitute win a centuries-old battle against the university? Had her London barrister been a client? And that was a story I really did think I was going to find when I embarked on this research. But the more I delved into the archives, the more I discovered, and the crosser I became. So where was the spinning house and how did it get its name? That's the sort of, this is a map. I hope you can see St Andrew Street Chapel, it's still there. The spinning house, you can see. And I think University Arms Hotel is kind of over there. So you should be able to orientate yourself as to where it is. It was in St Andrew Street. It was originally a 17th century workhouse built for money donated by Thomas Hobson of Hobson's Choice. Hobson, we all know Hobson, I hope. Yeah. It was a place where the poor were sent to learn a trade, to spin flax, hence the spinning house. And here it is, that's the spinning house. That stood on the spot until 1901 actually it was demolished. Quite a big building. Anyway, Hobson's chattel in Dover didn't last for very long. After his death, it became a lockup for vagabonds, thieves, and disorderly women. A prison shared by the town and the gown. A place whose account books for 1748 record, paid Horner Johnson, town crier, by order of Mr. Vice-Chancellor, for whipping 10 unruly women, 10 shillings. It didn't do to step out of line if you're a woman. Anyway, things changed in 1823 when a new jail was built. Actually, along Gonville Place, you may have seen photographs of it. Yes, a new town was built there, jail was there. So the university decided they'd take over the vacated spinning house and have it as their own. And this day also coincided with the time when there were more and more students coming to Cambridge, which was putting a huge strain on college accommodation. So students started to live in lodging houses in the town, which was a bit scary for the university. And lodging house keepers, they really had to abide by some very, very strict rules. In fact, someone has written, Margaret Holbrook's written a whole book about this. So the university got their own prison, but that wasn't enough. They wanted something else. They now wanted their own police force. So in 1825, they got an Act of Parliament was passed and the right to have their own private police force. Now the university really were ready to clean the streets of Cambridge. This picture. So every term time evening, senior members of the university and their special constables, known as bulldogs, I'm sure you're all familiar with bulldogs, patrolled the streets of Cambridge searching for unchaperoned women. I was really excited when I found this picture in the Museum of Cambridge, because I hadn't until relatively recently even seen inside the prison. And I think just seeing it, and thinking of women going up and down those steps, I found it quite chilling, really. And here's some, you know what bulldogs look like, I'm sure, but I thought I'd put in a picture of some bulldogs. So behind the scenes, the bulldogs, who were local men, they took great pride in sniffing out every morsel of tittle-tattle about the young women living in Cambridge. True or false, a rumour could lead to ruin and arrest. In his book, Grads and Snobs, Nick Mansfield explains how some of these people, some townspeople were actually eager to associate with the university because they saw them as their social superior, and this really only strengthened the power of the university. So it was really down to the more ordinary working people to fight this battle against the university. Now this is a slight aside because the spinning house was demolished in 1901, and this is what was put up in its place. And it's still there now. It's the police station. You're all familiar with it? Being a bit nosy, I popped in before it got, they locked the doors, because it's being made into a boutique hotel called the Hobson. And it's beautiful inside. And I just thought, I wanted to show you this, because there's so few Victorian buildings left in Cambridge now. I just wanted you to know that it's there. And when that hotel does finally open, get in there. It's just beautiful. The stained glass is wonderful. It is just so wonderful. And it's just great to think the town used to have such beautiful buildings, and so many have gone. It's just so sad. I think Lloyd's Bank is another great one to go and look at if you haven't already. Bit of old Cambridge. Anyway, that's just an aside. Right, so what do we know about the women who were sent to the spinning house and what happened to them after their arrest? These are the committal books, which are in Cambridge University Library. So from 1823, the university kept records of all the women they arrested. The spinning house committal books bulge with the names of thousands of women. Over 6,000 arrests were made between 1823 and 1894. After being delivered into the hands of the matron, the prisoner endured a night in a cold, damp cell. At 11 o'clock the next morning, the Vice-Chancellor came along to hear the evidence against the accused. The prisoner was only required to speak her name. The Vice-Chancellor, the first question he would ask was, did she come quietly? If she hadn't, if she had kicked off, then that went against her. Then he wanted to know if she'd been arrested before. If the girl had been arrested before, then it was a dead cert. She was definitely going to get a sentence. And if she was found in the company of an undergraduate, that was it. She'd get a very long sentence. But the really important thing to remember here is this. Not one of those women received a fair trial according to the law of the land. Not one had even broken the law of the land. No sworn evidence against these girls was recorded, or even, I believe, spoken. Sentencing was arbitrary, depending if they'd come quietly, if they'd been arrested before. So really, it seems to me, in this being poor, pretty, and petulant was really their biggest crime. The spinning house itself was frequently condemned by prison inspectors for being cold, damp, and poorly run. And over half the women who were arrested were actually teenage girls. I think they were quite keen on kicking off, really. But in their committal books, we meet Elizabeth Howe, Emma Kemp, Jane Elsden, and Daisy Hopkins, the four. These four women's brave court cases for wrongful arrest caused national and international outrage. So the four. I've painstakingly recreated their lives, the lives of each of these women. Not much is written about the lives of working class women. So much more is written about the men. When the women step out of line, their voices and those of their friends and families can be heard in the pages of court documents and national newspapers. So from the archives, I've done my very best to piece together the lives of these women. So Elizabeth Howe, Emma Kemp, Jane Elsden, and Daisy Hopkins. Each of them, over a 60-year period, caused the university enough embarrassment for them to make small changes to how the prison was run until eventually demolishing it was actually going to be the only answer. First, we have Elizabeth Howe. Elizabeth Howe, age 19. On December 1846, Elizabeth Howe died from being put to a bed in the spinning house. Put to a damp bed in the spinning house. Her crime being found in Hobson Street, close to a house of ill repute. Her death certificate records death caused by being confined in a cold and draughty cell in Hobson's workhouse. And there it is, you can't really read it. But as a historian, it's just so wonderful to see this, all written out. And it mentions, they use the word Hobson's workhouse. It's just amazing. And the fact she did die because she'd been put in this damp bed. So news of her death promoted national outrage. But how did that happen? Well, this is when I became acquainted with Charles Henry Cooper. Have many of you heard of Cooper, Charles Henry Cooper? Cooper's Annals? If you're into history, you will have done. Well, Charles Henry Cooper was a solicitor and coroner and town clerk in Cambridge from the 1840s till his death in 1866. He was actually an outsider, a Whig, a man with a fascination for the past, but keen to shape a more liberal future for Cambridge. He painstakingly documented all the history of Cambridge in his Annals of Cambridge. And the university were really against the publication of this. They really were frightened that people might start scrutinising the rights and privileges they claimed they had. And people might discover they perhaps didn't. Cooper actually knew their claim to have the right to arrest and imprison women was ripe for revision if only someone dared. He dared. He called a 2-day inquest into the death of Elizabeth Howe, and he made sure the findings were reported in the national press. He was, after all, the local correspondent for the Times. He was well connected and invited the social reformer Henry Mayhew, famous for London and Labour poor, and also at that time a columnist for the Morning Post, to visit the spinning house. Mayhew visited the spinning house and delivered a scathing attack. It was called the Spinning House Abomination. And you can see this in Cambridge Central Library, the Cambridgeshire collection. So it was in the newspaper, but people at Cambridge were so excited by this really damning critique of the spinning house that they had it bound up into volumes, and they sold, I don't know how many they sold, but they sold. And the Spinning House Abomination, it made very uncomfortable reading. And it forced the university to pay more attention to the cruel conditions forced upon those finding themselves in the spinning house. There was an awful keeper at that time called Wilson, and he also ran a tailoring business on the side. He wasn't paid much money for being keeper of the spinning house, so he had his tailoring business as well. And I think, I don't know for a fact, that the women helped him with it. He was really cruel. If the girls didn't keep quiet, he'd pull their hair, he'd throw them into solitary confinement. He served them stale bread and what they called stinking beer, because people drank beer then rather than tea and that. But he bought really cheap beer, which was off, and he really wasn't a very kind man at all. And eventually, when actually after the Spinning House Abomination, the university realised they had to get rid of the keeper, and they did, and a matron was appointed. And a new heating system was installed. So Elizabeth Howe died, and the Spinning House got a new matron, a female matron, and some more, better heating. They then moved to Emma Kemp, aged 24. In January 1860, Emma Kemp was one of 7 young women found on an omnibus in the company of 2 undergraduates. They'd just set up for a private party in Great Shelf at the De Freville Arms, which is actually now Noel Young Wines. You may be familiar with it. So it's quite nice to know the building's still there. Although everybody in the party was actually sworn to absolute secrecy, a jealous rival not invited to the party wanted her revenge. A letter arrived at one of the proctors for Trinity College from an inhabitant of the town. It claimed that Emma Kemp was the ringleader of a spree, suggesting that she was some kind of madam and she'd got some girls together. Worse, breakfast was to be served in the inn the following morning. A big red flag, but a lie. It caused huge amounts of trouble and anguish. So just after 6 o'clock on the evening of the 30th of January, 1860, the omnibus was ambushed as it left Parker's Piece. It had set off from Melbourne Place, where it had picked up the girls from, that was sort of Barnwell in those days, picked up the girls, and they'd sort of tweaked their best Sunday best, and they were terribly excited. But anyway, it moved on and actually got into Gonville Place, and then they were surrounded by proctors and bulldogs and the local police, so that the omnibus came to a halt, and it was redirected to the spinning house. The men were sent back to their college. The townspeople were absolutely outraged when it was confirmed that Emma Kemp was a poor but respectable young woman. Local businessmen decided to crowdfund to raise funds to enable women to sue the university for wrongful arrest. Thompson Cooper, solicitor, an eldest son of Charles Henry Cooper, was one of the solicitors who offered his assistance in the matter. Emma Kemp decided she wanted to clear her name because she was a respectable young woman, so she wanted to clear her name. So court papers were issued to the university. The university got really, really nervous about this because they knew a trial happening in Cambridge, there'd be so much riot going on. They decided they wanted to get it moved. So they actually got it moved to London, to the Court of Common Pleas, very fine building here, the court in Westminster Hall. I have managed to get in there, but it looks absolutely beautiful. And I think it's still the same there. Just stunning carved seating. Anyway, the university was so worried that Emma might win her case. They stopped at absolutely nothing to find ways to discredit Emma and her character. And the tittle-tattle was weaponized as fact. So during the trial, when she was on trial, they said to her, had she associated with a young man called Vaughan? Had she had a miscarriage? This is 1860, this is a young woman. Can you imagine how awful she must have felt? At no point was the man Vaughan called for questioning. What we see here is victim shaming. It's a tactic that we still see happening today, literally, today, well, recently. We go with Trump, Epstein, Prince Andrew, the Pico trial. It still happens that when ordinary women go up against powerful men, they will stop at nothing to discredit the women, as if it's their fault somehow. Emma actually got off. She was actually proven to be innocent, but just her pure association with the spinning house and all that went on meant that she actually lost her good job, and when she was a milliner, she ended up just being a charwoman after this. But the universities, by their tactics, were actually made sort of very foolish and out of date. So to save face, they decided that in future, the proctors would be more careful about who they arrested, and fewer women were sent to the spinning house after that. We have Jane Elsden, the lovely, feisty Jane Elsden. In the summer of 1888, 15-year-old Jane Elsden took up lodgings in Kettle's Yard. Not quite what we imagine Kettle's Yard as today. It was a part of Cambridge well known for its poverty and vice. A dank place where 26 cottages, described as fever dens, had been squeezed together, and the inhabitants drew their water from a pump in St Giles's Church, where the water filtered through the corpses of their ancestors. No wonder they drank a lot of beer. Jane's name soon appeared in the court records as the victim of catty fights. And when her name appeared as perpetrator of a street scuffle and she received a prison sentence, then she came under the gaze of the bulldogs. Her days of freedom were numbered. In February 1891, Jane Elsden was dragged into the spinning house hours after being released after having served a 2-week sentence, being found in a company of an undergraduate in Trinity Lane. This time, all she was doing was walking on her own in petticurie. And I popped this slide in, and it's not very big, just to remind you, well, perhaps this is how petticurie used to look. Isn't it charming? Isn't it lovely? Again, it's so much of Cambridge we've lost. There's such a shame. Anyway, Jane Elsden, feisty Jane Elsden, she was really angry at being arrested because she hadn't broken any laws at all, not even those in the Charter. And her absolute unbridled anger at being arrested earned her a 3-week sentence. 3 weeks. She'd had 2 weeks because she'd been found with an undergraduate. And I think she thought, okay, fair enough, I'll accept this. 3 weeks, just being on her own. This really wasn't fair. But Jane, with an insider's knowledge of the prison, knew how to get out of the prison. She knew all the little matron's habits. And she knew at 4 o'clock, matron would always go and post her letters in the post office, which I think was on the corner of petticurie. Anyway, Jane knew that if she opened one door, she could get into the chaplain's office, and from there she could actually get out the window and she'd get into St Andrew Street. So that's what she did. The Vice-Chancellor, Montague Butler from Trinity, he was absolutely furious, and he demanded her rearrest for prison breaking. He'd made a mistake. Prison breaking was a civil matter. The case had to be heard by a local magistrate, which actually meant that a lot was exposed to what was going on in the spinning house. So people heard about how she'd been sentenced, how she'd been rearrested, the conditions inside, and it got a lot more publicity. But the trouble was, the local magistrate couldn't actually solve the problem. He decided he actually needed the ear of a judge. So Jane went to the Assize Courts in Castle Hill. This is the Assize Courts in Castle Hill. No longer there, of course. I think it's a car park now. Beautiful, really lovely building. And both of the trials of Jane's trials were reported locally in the national newspapers. And the evidence really exposed the archaic rights and privileges of the university. And there's lots of condemnation about the heavy hand of the university. And much was said about the number, quoting here, the antiquated laws enforced by fossilised men at Cambridge. But the Elizabethan Charter always proved the stumbling block, and it would need an Act of Parliament to actually overturn it. But that would take time and money and the backing of very powerful people. But there was so much frustration about the blockage that some prominent people of the day did decide to take up Jane's cause. First, we have the radical MP for Northampton, Henry Labouchere, a one-time circus performer known as the Bounding Buck of Babylon. Honestly, you couldn't make this up. And he wore pink tights. He was a man who was going to stop at nothing just to embarrass the ruling Conservative Party. So he stood up in the House and wanted to know when the antiquated laws of Cambridge would be reviewed. He did this just to embarrass the Cambridge MP. There were two MPs then, by the way, in Cambridge, a university MP and a town one. But the town one hadn't turned up. He wasn't going to fight this. So this is why Labouchere wanted to really embarrass the Conservative Party. But because he had actually got up and mentioned this, of course it was reported in the newspapers, people heard about what was going on in Cambridge. And as a result of this, Lady Littleton, Lucy Cavendish College, she had a word with the Salvation Army. She wanted Jane released into their care, because at this time they had their own social wing for women, and they were doing an awful lot of really good work with the poor, to learn a trade. So no one was going to argue with this respected lady, Lady Littleton. Actually, it's really sad with Lady Littleton, Lucy Cavendish. I don't know why she has both names still, but she married obviously Lord Cavendish, and he was the Secretary of State for Ireland, and he got murdered in Dublin on the Phoenix Park massacre. If you ever want to look it up, it's so sad. They didn't have any children, and she was just devastated. And she spent the rest of her life really working really hard to improve education for women, hence her Lucy Cavendish College. So Jane had a good person on her side here. So Jane was taken to London, out of the spinning house, where she learned to trade, book folding. And the great thing about lockdown is I had loads of time. I emailed loads of people saying, can you help me, can you help me, you got any information? And the Salvation Army came up trumps for their archive. And they sent me this picture of some girls actually folding, book folding. So you get big pages that would come off the printer, and they'd have a stick and they'd sort of fold it. And it talks about the neat pinafore dresses, talks about the prayer and care. There were prayers 3 times a day. The girls had to be very, very neat and tidy. I think managing the girls was a bit tricky sometimes. I think these girls by nature a bit hot-headed. I think it was took quite a lot of effort to actually keep them under control. Anyway, Jane endured 3 months of the care and prayer until payday. The Salvation Army would tolerate most things, but not drunkenness. Jane returned to Cambridge. Interestingly, she lived into her 90s and died in Plymouth. So maybe that kind of lifestyle isn't so bad. But I'm not going to test it. Anyway, with such eminent people being involved, the Vice-Chancellor Montague Butler, who was actually related to the feminist campaigner Josephine Butler, and who I just really think, I did search hard in the archives, I couldn't find any correspondence between them. But I just feel that Josephine Butler would have had a word with her brother-in-law about what was going on in Cambridge. So he did decide, in future, any woman taken to Spinning House will receive a fair trial, be offered legal representation, and the court will be open to the public. The days of the Spinning House were now numbered. Daisy Hopkins. In December 1891, Daisy Hopkins was arrested after being found in the company of a member of the university. This was a very tense moment in the history of town and gown relations. The whole town would have been, oh my God, what's going to happen next? So the first time a prisoner was permitted legal assistance in the newly constructed Spinning House Court, the first time witnesses would give there'd be witness sworn statements, members of the public could actually attend the process. But the problem of trying to run a court whilst adhering to the ancient charter and the laws of the land proved both frustrating and comical for Daisy's solicitor, Algernon Jasper Lyon. What a name. He was a councillor for Barnwell, and in his election manifesto he had promised to serve the interests of the town as opposed to those of the gown. This is Daisy Hopkins, the only sort of picture, sketch we have of her. And actually she's on the cover of the book, the back cover of the book. The university looked very foolish when the man found in the company of Daisy Hopkins actually confessed he was actually soliciting her. And it also looked very foolish when the Vice-Chancellor refused to actually hear Daisy's account of what had actually happened on the night she was arrested. So we will actually never know the truth. She says she was actually walking the streets, having been to see her fiancé, she told her solicitor, but again, it was never heard in court, so we'll never know the truth. Because the Vice-Chancellor decided that she was actually guilty. And she was found guilty on the grounds that her name had appeared on a list of prostitutes which was compiled by the police. Although, as her solicitor pointed out, the list was compiled on hearsay. There was no evidence whatsoever these women had done anything wrong, but she received a 2-week sentence. So Daisy's solicitor, working with John Cooper, a barrister and son of Charles Henry Cooper. I keep bringing the Coopers in because at one time I wanted to write the whole thing from the perspective of this Cooper family because they were so determined to see the end of the spinning house. Anyway, so John Cooper, the barrister, he points out a technical error in the committal paperwork. The paperwork stated Daisy was accused of being found in the company of a member of the university, but she was tried for being in a company of a member of the university for the purpose of evil. So that's two slightly different things. And it made legal history because you can't arrest someone for one thing and try them for another, even though it's only a matter of a few words, the difference. So Algernon Jasper Lyon and John Cooper, they decided they would take the court to London for a case of habeas corpus. It was fought in the Royal Courts of Justice. It was a landmark case, which is still talked about today. In, I think, year 2000, Lord Chief Justice Brown, I think it was, his law lecture was on this very topic, and that's not so long ago, so it's very current. I think with the university, they didn't ever expect anyone was actually going to scrutinise the documents, because nobody had. Why would they? It was their prison, their rules. No one was going to do it. So they were very lax with their paperwork, really. Anyway, having secured Daisy's arrest for wrongful imprisonment, she decided she was going to sue the university. Again, they didn't want it heard in Cambridge for fear of riot. It was going to go to Norwich. The Norwich didn't really want it either. Anyway, and then Ipswich decided they'd have it. But like with Emma Kemp, the university were really, really nervous now. They wanted to win this case, or to make sure they won this case. They spent loads and loads of time collecting any evidence, every bit of tittle-tattle evidence they could against Daisy Hopkins. And that's in the university library, and all the statements are in there. It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Again, the defending barrister, he smeared Daisy's name. Did she sometimes smoke in the street? Which is quite, saying that to the girl was actually quite something then. Did she sometimes walk in the streets with known prostitutes? All this to undermine the respectable facade she was trying to prove, because she wore very nice clothes. Actually, it's interesting in the papers, they always talk about what the women are wearing. And she's wearing a feather boa at one point, and some kind of false fringe, and a black jacket. I mean, they really went to tell her what she was wearing. And I think that still happens now, actually. Anyway, doubt was cast on her innocence because of all this smearing, and she lost the case. But a correspondent to the London Daily News commented, and I quote, "Daisy Hopkins must find consolation in the thought that she will one day have a place in the textbooks as the cause, however little, of a great event, the abolition of these antiquated jurisdictions." He was right. In 1894, the university lost the right to arrest and imprison women, and in 1901, the spinning house was abolished. The Cooper family had done their work. I'm now going to read you a section from my book. The facts come from documents which I gathered for the inquest into the death of Elizabeth Howe. I read them in the reading room of the Cambridgeshire Archives, pencil in hand, really ready for taking notes. I couldn't take any notes that first reading. I could only read in horror as the story unfolded. The reader will know it's a cold morning in November 1846, and we're in Cambridge. It was almost 12 noon on Saturday the 7th of November when an exhausted Elizabeth returned to her lodgings in Union Row. Every single step of the half-mile journey from the spinning house inflamed her aching limbs. She clutched at her chest several times. She made her slow, painful walk home, willing more air into her constricted lungs. Her landlady, Rose, was shocked at the sight of the pale and wheezing figure returning to her house, complaining that she felt ill all over. She lit a fire to soothe the ailing girl, but heat worsened the symptoms. There was no improvement the following day or the next. This was no ordinary chill. Rose was worried. A doctor would cost her dear. "Write to your mother," she urged Elizabeth. "Tell her to come quickly." Each day Lydia's symptoms grew worse, not better. And each day Rose expected her mother. But Mrs. Howe couldn't read. Unaware of the urgency, she was slow to find someone who could reveal the contents of her daughter's letter. Increasingly alarmed at Elizabeth's decline and unsure how to proceed, Rose finally called the doctor, agonising as to who would settle his bill. Mr. Charles Newby, a local surgeon, arrived to find the patient in a dreadful condition. By then, any movement caused excruciating pain. Examining her tongue, Newby found it much coated. Her pulse recorded as 120 a minute. She was extremely thirsty, yet her urine was scant and highly coloured, he recorded in his notes. "How did you catch such a violent cold?" he wanted to know. "I was put to a damp bed in the spinning house," the patient whispered. "The cell was cold and draughty. The window was broken." Mr. Newby was gravely concerned, both by her story and her condition. He decided she needed daily monitoring. Sometimes he even visited twice. First, he tried a strong purgative and saline diaphoretics, but those failed to ease her symptoms. The next day, he instructed Rose to make up a foot bath containing hot water with a quarter pound of mustard and a pint of vinegar. Meanwhile, he drew urine from his patient as he believed its retention was causing problems. The days went by. Nothing seemed to soothe Elizabeth's condition. A second week began, the 4th week since her incarceration in the spinning house. Elizabeth was no longer certain. The sounds of the cartwheels outside were the night soil man collecting the black cargo or the milkman delivering fresh milk. Her friends called daily to help Rose fetch fresh water from the nearby pump. On Monday, November the 30th, Elizabeth Howe slipped into delirium. When her friend Emma Osborne visited that evening, Rose told her, "Fetch Newby, tell him to bring more medicine." Emma hurried off into the dark streets, wanting to do anything she could to help her friend. But as she neared the doctor's house, a proctor spotted her. "What are you doing? Where are you going at this hour?" he demanded to know. "Sir, my friend, she is seriously ill, sir. I'm sent to fetch Mr. Newby," she replied. "I don't believe you," said the proctor. "But please, sir, I need him urgently," Emma pleaded. "Get home now, or I'll send you to the spinning house." Fearing arrest, Emma had no choice but to return empty-handed to Rose. At 1:30 in the morning of the 1st of December, 25 days after her arrest, 90-year-old Elizabeth Howe moved from delirium to death. Back in a small cottage in the village of Fulbourn, near Cambridge. Her desperate note summoning her mother lay opened but unread. Can you imagine this happened in a city now so famous for its prestigious university? Read the book and decide yourself who's innocent and who's guilty and of what. Thank you.
I've learned a lot from her, and I thought I knew all about the spinning house and stuff, but and those proctors, but amazing. If anybody's got any questions, now's the time. Right over here.
Did any of the men who were consulted get punished in any way?
No, they didn't really. I think sometimes they might be rusticated, but nothing like what happened to the women.
I think they had to get them pregnant first. And then they could be sent down.
Me. Do you have any records, like, because the law came in the 1500s, didn't it?
Yes.
Are there any records going back right from the beginning?
All I know is before the charter, the proctors would send the girls to the castle prison, but the mayor held the keys to the castle and he'd let them go. That's why they want the university wanted the charter, so the townspeople could do it.
I wondered, thank you for the talk, I wondered about the female undergraduates when they joined the university. Did that change attitudes at all? And did any of them get caught up with the Bulldog?
Well, actually, women coming to Cambridge, and actually Don's being allowed to marry from 1880 onwards, were quite drivers, really, because there were more women around. And there was this tremendous fear that respectable women might get arrested. So it did help, yes.
Was it called the spinning house because it, like a workhouse, that had been spinning?
Yes, they were there to learn to spin flax, to learn a trade, an honourable thing, you know.
Yeah.
But it got the nickname the spinning house.
And then, sorry, extra question. You've quoted a couple of sentences, sort of 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Was that normal, or were they sometimes even longer than that?
Well, early on, they sometimes got longer, sometimes they've got a month or more. Yeah, pretty random, really.
Thank you very much for the talk, and thank you for such looking into a really interesting subject like this. My question is this: have you come across the case which was involved a woman who worked on the streets called Emma Rolfe, who died on Midsummer Common? That was in I think the 1880s. I have forgotten the date, but she was murdered. She was very young, and I understood I'm in a choir where we sang a version of it. We understood that the Emma Rolfe case at the time was a very big deal case in the town, and I wonder again if it was because that she was a very young woman, and obviously in this case she paid for her alleged sin with her life.
Yes, I'm very familiar with the case, very, very familiar with it, actually. Yeah, the town, I think it's because it was her age, really. What was it, murder for the price of a loaf of bread, I think, were the headlines. And yeah, it was, yes. I remember, I think they lined Mill Road, I think, when it was her funeral, and she's in Mill Road Cemetery. Yes, it's quite very
also because the murderer confessed at the time.
Yes.
So he was arrested.
Yes.
He was arrested.
He was arrested and he was hanged.
Actually, I'm actually in the process of trying to look at the court records for that, funnily enough. But they're closed at the moment. Few information being on them. They say it's because it's disturbing reading, and I think I might not bother to read it. Because, yeah, it's all pretty grim. Terrible tragedy.
There's a question here.
So I have 2 questions. The first one is whether the university, whether other crimes were punished in the spinning house, whether other people were sent there.
No, just women.
Just women.
Yeah.
Okay. And the other question is whether elsewhere in the UK, this sort of delegation of law enforcement to private entities was happening anywhere, for example, in factories or somewhere else.
Well, the question usually is what was going on at Oxford. And the answer is, the same thing was happening at Oxford. What was different in Oxford is that when women were arrested, they were taken before the magistrate, and they got a proper fair hearing, according to the law of the land. And if they were then found guilty, they went to the local prison. So that's sort of different. So Cambridge was exclusively different.
The reason why I'm asking about other places is to see, just wondering whether there is a tendency for working class people to be policed in a slightly different way, and whether there would be unofficial ways to deal with them rather than just through the usual legal process that would apply maybe to better.
I'm sure there's lots of arguments in the town about both parties being treated differently. and being suspected more frequently. But that's all I can say. I don't know much more about that. Sorry. Okay, but the Institute of Criminology would have all that stuff.
When did the universities lose their right to have their own MPs?
I think it was 54, 1954, was it 50s?
48. Because presumably they had been ratifying the Charter in Parliament.
Presumably, yes. Yes. And their names never appear in the court cases, coming forward and saying anything at all, either way.
Yeah.
Were there any elements in the town that were in favour of the university's powers or supported what you did?
As I alluded to earlier, this sort of snobs, this book by Nick Mansfield about snobs and grads, and some people really always wanted to align with the powerful elite, educated elite, and said they, oh yes, you know. So in a way, it sort of scuppered things happening sooner, I think, really.
How did the town council respond to anything?
Well, they had to swear allegiance to uphold the laws of the university, but then that did change actually in 1850 after Prince Albert he wanted to reform all the universities. I think then it was abolished. It's called a black something, I forget now. They hated doing it, the council. The most of them did. Some didn't mind. Yeah, does that answer your question? So I rambled on a bit.
Yes.
Thank you, that was so interesting. I just want to ask you, you talked quite a lot about the town and gown, but then mentioned that the Bulldogs seems to be more local people and how that kind of worked with like local people kind of going against the other local women and what that kind of relationship was like.
Yeah, I think probably going to sing about sort of people being a bit snobby. I think the Bulldogs were very proud to wear a lovely uniform, a warm uniform. They looked very smart. They were getting good pay. Well, that's what they were getting paid anyway. and they felt very pleased with themselves, you know. And they really were very diligent in finding out all the tittle tattle about them. Some things I read, so that we noticed that she was wearing a rag, because then one day she was wearing a fine dress. This is Daisy Hopkins. You know, and they're noticing these things.
You have to think from the context of a period when half the town worked for the university anyway.
Mm.
So
That's a whole other story.
yes.
I was wondering if you've had any feedback from the university with regard to your work, or what is the university's position?
They say it's historic stuff like same slavery.
Apologies out of the question.
Yeah.
By the university.
I would like to see a blue plaque actually on the building. There's one now at Hobson. But I think I would like to see it recognised that it used to be the spinning house. But it just says it used to be a spinning house, so it doesn't have, they're going to look it up if they want to. Because that's what I would like to see.
That's a good idea.
But perhaps an exhibition at the University Libraries, you can see all these books and things too. Would be interesting for the town. Actually, Cambridge and Huntingdonshire Family History Association have just got some money to work with the UL, University Libraries, to actually digitise those committal books. And that should be delivered in the spring. So that would be a nice time actually for them to have an exhibition.
I've just got my reader's card for the UL, and I'm heading for those books to see if my great aunts were ever committed. I would like, but I just like to get my hand on it.
Inspired your writing.
Well, that was an amazing, lovely number of questions. Thank you. Thank you so much for all coming. There don't seem to be very many books.
Well, I've got some more in the box.
Okay, right. So you take part.
I do take part.
Just before you all jump up, it's not a lot, but it might get you through the festive season.